A poor student helped an old man cross the street, not realizing he was a retired billionaire. This single act of kindness would forever alter the course of two lives that had never been meant to intersect. But fate has a curious way of orchestrating the most profound connections through the simplest of gestures. Marcus Bennett hunched his shoulders against the biting November wind, his worn canvas jacket offering little protection as he hurried across campus. The weight of his backpack felt heavier than usual, laden not just with textbooks but with the mounting pressure of his circumstances. 3 past due notices had arrived this week: rent, electricity, and worst of all, this semester's remaining tuition balance. The university's financial aid office had made it clear, no payment by Monday meant no finals, which meant no credits, which meant the past 3.5 years of sacrifice would crumble like the autumn leaves beneath his feet. 22 years old, and already the architecture he'd carefully designed for his future was showing dangerous structural flaws. His phone vibrated. Another text from his mother. Sent what I could. $43. I'm sorry, sweetie. Marcus swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes that wasn't entirely from the wind. His mother had been working double shifts at the diner since his father's death 3 years ago. He'd promised her he'd make something of himself, become the first college graduate in their family. Now he was $2,700 short with 4 days to deadline. The campus coffee shop where he worked part-time had cut his hours. Holiday season meant students went home. Business slowed. His other job, stocking shelves at the grocery store, barely covered ramen and bus fare. The irony wasn't lost on him. Surrounded by buildings designed to nurture potential, yet watching his own dreams slip between his fingers like sand. He turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, the icy wind now at his back, pushing him forward as if in mockery of his stalled momentum in life. Most students had already left for the weekend, leaving the streets empty except for... Marcus noticed him at the intersection. An elderly man standing at the curb, one gnarled hand gripping a wooden cane, the other clutching a paper bag to his chest. Despite the cold, he wore only a thin overcoat that hung loosely on his frame. The pedestrian signal flashed its countdown, but the old man hadn't moved, staring at the pavement with apprehension etched into the deep lines of his face. Marcus checked his watch. He was already late for his shift at the grocery store. One more tardy and Mr. Gaines would have the excuse he'd been looking for to replace him with the owner's nephew. He should hurry past. He should focus on his own problems. Instead, he found himself stopping. "Excuse me, sir? Do you need some help crossing?" The old man looked up, startled by the voice. His eyes, a clear, penetrating blue, seemed at odds with his weathered face and hunched posture. For a moment, those eyes assessed Marcus with surprising sharpness. "If it's not too much trouble," the man finally replied, his voice gravelly but gentle. "These crosswalks get shorter every year. Or perhaps I get slower." A hint of a smile softened his face. Marcus stepped beside him, offering his arm. "I'm headed this way anyway." The old man's fingers wrapped around Marcus's forearm, thin but surprisingly firm. Together they stepped off the curb, moving at a cautious pace. "My name is Edward," the old man offered as they navigated the crosswalk. "Edward Phillips." Marcus Bennett, architecture student. Edward nodded toward the large portfolio case strapped to Marcus's backpack. "Yes, sir. Senior year." "Ah, to build things that last. A noble pursuit." Something in Edward's tone made Marcus glance sideways. The old man was looking upward at the skyline, his expression both wistful and appraising. The light changed before they reached the opposite curb, but Marcus maintained their steady pace, ignoring the impatient rev of an engine from a waiting car. "People are always in such a hurry," Edward remarked, seemingly unbothered, "racing toward destinations without seeing the journey." Once safely across, Marcus expected the interaction to end. But Edward's grip on his arm remained, and the old man winced slightly as he adjusted his weight on his cane. "Are you okay, sir? Do you need to rest a minute?" Edward shook his head. "Just these old bones protesting the cold. I was heading to that cafe on the corner. Would you?" He hesitated. "Would you perhaps join me for a cup of coffee?" "My treat, of course. Small thanks for your assistance." Marcus felt the phone in his pocket vibrate again. Probably Mr. Gaines, wondering where he was. The responsible choice was clear: politely decline, rush to work, cling to the job he couldn't afford to lose. But something in those clear blue eyes held him. A loneliness that resonated with his own, perhaps. Or maybe it was just that this was the first genuine human interaction he'd had in days that wasn't transactional or stress-laden. "I'd like that," Marcus heard himself say, knowing he was making the wrong choice for all the right reasons. The cafe was warm and nearly empty, the late afternoon lull creating a pocket of tranquility. Edward insisted on a table by the window, removing his threadbare coat to reveal a sweater that had once been expensive, but now showed signs of wear at the elbows and collar. Marcus noticed these details automatically. His architectural training had taught him to observe, to see the history and structures, the story told by wear patterns and adaptations. Order whatever you like. Edward gestured toward the chalkboard menu. I find myself with an appetite for conversation more than food these days. Marcus ordered just coffee, though his stomach tightened at the aroma of fresh pastries. Edward requested tea, and despite his earlier comment, a sandwich. So tell me, Edward said after their drinks arrived, what sort of architect do you hope to become? The question, so direct yet open-ended, caught Marcus off guard. Most people asked about jobs or firms, not about aspirations. I want to design spaces that matter, he said finally. Affordable housing that doesn't feel like punishment for being poor. Community centers that actually serve communities. Buildings that solve problems instead of just filling space. He stared into his coffee, embarrassed by his own earnestness. Edward didn't respond immediately, and when Marcus looked up, he found the old man studying him with that same penetrating gaze. Nobility of purpose, Edward said softly. Rarer than you might think. He took a sip of his tea. And what stands between you and this admirable future? The question hit too close to the pressure point of Marcus's anxiety. He shifted in his seat, considering a polite deflection. But something about Edward's attentive silence invited honesty. About $2,700 for starters, Marcus admitted with a dry laugh. Tuition balance due Monday, or I don't take finals. 3.5 years down the drain. He hadn't meant to be so blunt, to burden a stranger with his troubles. But Edward merely nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. The immediacy of financial concerns often obscures our vision of what's possible, Edward remarked. I've known this truth from both sides of the equation. Before Marcus could decipher this cryptic statement, Edward continued. Tell me, if you had a building to design right now, with no constraints, what would you create? For the next hour, Marcus found himself talking more than he had in months. Edward asked questions that cut to the heart of Marcus's passions, drawing out ideas he'd barely articulated even to himself. As Marcus described his vision for urban renewal projects and sustainable community spaces, he used napkins to sketch concepts, forgetting his looming deadline, his missed shift, everything but the pure joy of architectural imagination. Edward listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering insights that revealed surprising knowledge of architectural principles and urban planning. The old man ate only half his sandwich, pushing the other half toward Marcus with a casual, I can never finish these portions, that somehow didn't feel like charity. When they finally parted ways outside the cafe, the streetlights were coming on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Edward extended a hand, and Marcus was struck again by the strength in those thin fingers. Thank you, Marcus Bennett. For the crossing, yes, but more for the conversation. It's been illuminating. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Phillips. Can I help you get home? Edward shook his head. I don't live far, but perhaps... He paused, seeming to make a decision. Perhaps we might continue our discussion another time. I have some books on urban renewal from the 1970s that might interest you. Historical context for your modern solutions. Marcus found himself agreeing to meet at the same cafe in 2 days' time. As he watched Edward make his way slowly down the street, cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the concrete, Marcus was struck by the curious lightness in his chest. As if, for a brief window of time, someone had lifted the weight of his worries and allowed him to remember why he had chosen his path in the first place. The feeling lasted until he checked his phone. 7 missed calls from Mr. Gaines and a final text message that needed no interpretation. Don't bother coming in tomorrow. Or ever. Just like that, the weight crashed back down, heavier than before. Edward Phillips did not take the bus back to his modest one-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street, where the building manager believed he was a retired high school teacher living on a pension. Instead, once out of Marcus's sight, he walked 4 blocks to where a black Lincoln Town car waited, its driver standing patiently beside the rear door. Home, Mr. Phillips? The driver asked, his tone respectful but familiar. Yes, Robert. And contact Simmons at the foundation. I need to meet with him first thing tomorrow. Of course, sir. As the car pulled away from the curb, Edward gazed out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. The city had changed so much in the 60 years since he'd arrived, with nothing but $20 and a draftsman's certificate. Now his name graced buildings across the skyline, though few connected the reclusive billionaire Edward Phillips, founder of Phillips Development Corporation, with the buildings themselves. He'd been one of the lucky ones. Right place, right time, right handshake. His first affordable housing project had caught the eye of a senator's wife, leading to government contracts, which led to commercial developments, which led to an empire built on steel and concrete and glass. Somewhere along that trajectory, he'd lost something essential, the fire that had once driven him to create spaces that mattered. The empire had consumed him, then his marriage, then relationships with his children, who now managed various divisions of his corporation with competent indifference. He'd stepped away 5 years ago, leaving the business in their hands while he turned his attention to his charitable foundation. But even philanthropy had become a sterile exercise, conducted through intermediaries and board meetings, until today. Until he'd stood at that crosswalk, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue and the arthritis flaring in his hip, and a young man with worried eyes and a second-hand jacket had stopped to help. A strange thing, Robert, Edward mused aloud. I've donated millions to scholarship funds but never actually met a student who needed one. Robert, who had driven Edward for nearly 20 years, glanced in the rearview mirror. Perspective is valuable, sir. Indeed. Edward watched the neighborhoods change as they drove, from the modest student areas to the increasingly affluent districts, finally passing through the gates of Lakeside Estates, where his 6-bedroom home sat on 3 manicured acres. The house was beautiful, architecturally significant, and completely empty of anything resembling purpose. Edward had been rattling around in it alone since Marianne had moved permanently to their house in Bermuda 3 years ago. Their separation never formalized but tacitly understood. As Robert helped him from the car, Edward glanced up at the imposing facade. Do you know what that young man wants to build, Robert? Housing that doesn't feel like punishment for being poor. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. I used to talk like that 50 years ago. Robert, ever discreet, merely inclined his head. Your meeting with Mr. Simmons is set for 8 a.m., sir. Edward nodded, making his way slowly up the steps. Behind him, the garage door opened automatically to admit the town car, then closed again with quiet efficiency. Everything in his life operated this way now. Smooth, predictable, insulated, except for those unexpected moments at the crosswalk, when the world had suddenly seemed very large and very real, and he had felt for the first time in years that he was actually standing in it. Saturday morning found Marcus sitting on the floor of his studio apartment, surrounded by the classified section of the newspaper, his laptop open to job search sites, and a spreadsheet tracking his increasingly desperate calculations. The loss of the grocery store job had moved the situation from dire to impossible. Even if he found another position immediately, he wouldn't receive a paycheck before Monday's tuition deadline. His phone rang, his mother. He answered with forced cheerfulness. Hey, Mom, I sent another $30, honey. I know it's not much. Mom, stop. You need that money. I've got some leads on a new job. The lie tasted bitter. Things will work out. You know you can always come home, take some time. I'm not quitting. The words came out sharper than intended. He softened his tone. Sorry. I need to finish this. For Dad. For us. The silence on the other end confirmed what he already knew. She was working herself to exhaustion to support his dream, and now he couldn't even manage his end of things. I love you, she said finally. You're so much like him, you know. Not just your eyes, your determination. After they hung up, Marcus sat motionless, his father's face vivid in his memory. James Bennett had worked construction his entire life, coming home with concrete dust in the creases of his hands and pride in the structures he'd helped build. You've got the vision I never had, he'd told Marcus after his college acceptance. You'll design them and better ones than I ever got to build. 3 months later, a heart attack had taken him, leaving behind a modest life insurance policy that had covered funeral expenses and part of Marcus's first-year tuition. The rest had been cobbled together through scholarships, loans, his mother's extra shifts, and Marcus's own juggling of part-time jobs. Now, with the finish line in sight, he was going to fail. His gaze fell on his portfolio case leaning against the wall. Inside were the designs he'd been refining all semester for his capstone project. A mixed-use development combining affordable housing, community spaces, and small business incubators. His professor had called it ambitiously idealistic but structurally sound, which in Professor Harmon's vocabulary was high praise. A knock at the door startled him. Probably Mrs. Kaczynski from next door, offering him leftover pierogi again. The elderly widow had appointed herself his unofficial grandmother, since he'd helped her carry groceries up the 3 flights of stairs to their floor last year. But when he opened the door, it wasn't Mrs. Kaczynski. It was Edward Phillips, looking considerably less frail than he had the day before. He wore a better coat today, still modest but properly fitted, and carried both his cane and a canvas tote bag. "Mr. Phillips? How did you—" "Your address was on one of the sketches you made yesterday," Edward explained. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I brought those books I mentioned." He hefted the tote bag slightly. Marcus's surprise gave way to genuine pleasure. "Please come in. Though I should warn you, it's not much." The studio apartment was indeed small, just enough space for a bed, a desk, a compact kitchenette, and the bathroom. But it was meticulously organized, with architectural drawings pinned to the walls and models displayed on every available surface. Edward moved slowly around the space, examining each item with obvious interest. "You have a good eye for proportion," he commented, studying a model of a community garden complex. "This courtyard design, it invites gathering while still allowing for private reflection. Not an easy balance to achieve." Marcus felt a flush of pride at the specific, informed compliment. "That's exactly what I was going for." Edward set his tote bag on the desk and withdrew several books. Not the dusty volumes Marcus had expected, but pristine first editions of influential works on urban planning and architectural theory. As they discussed the books, Edward revealing a depth of knowledge that went well beyond casual interest, Marcus found himself relaxing into the conversation, despite his precarious situation. They talked for over an hour before Edward gestured toward the papers scattered on the floor. "I've interrupted your work. Job hunting, I presume?" Marcus nodded, embarrassment flooding back. "Lost one of my positions yesterday. Bad timing. Might I make a suggestion?" Edward asked, his tone careful. "I have a connection at the Westridge Foundation. They offer emergency grants to students in good standing who face unexpected financial hardship. The application is simple, and decisions are made quickly." Marcus had never heard of such a program, despite his constant search for financial aid opportunities. "That sounds too good to be true. It's a small, private foundation. Rather selective, but I believe you would qualify." Edward reached into his coat pocket and produced a business card with a phone number and website. "The contact there is expecting your call. A Mr. Simmons." Marcus took the card, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you do this for me?" Edward looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "When I was about your age, someone extended a hand when I needed it most. I've never forgotten it." He turned back to Marcus, his blue eyes clear and direct. "The world needs architects who care about more than just impressive skylines." After Edward left, promising to meet again at the cafe the following afternoon, Marcus immediately checked the website on the card. The Westridge Foundation appeared legitimate, small but well-established, with a focus on supporting promising students in financial crisis. The application was indeed straightforward, asking for his academic records, a statement of need, and examples of his work. When he called the number, Mr. Simmons answered personally, speaking with the efficiency of someone who valued time, but not at the expense of courtesy. Yes, they were accepting emergency applications. Yes, they could expedite the process given his Monday deadline. Yes, Mr. Phillips' recommendation carried significant weight. By Saturday evening, Marcus had submitted his application, including digital copies of his best designs. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a fragile hope. Sunday dawned with a rare November warmth, as if the season had briefly relented its march toward winter. Marcus woke early, unable to sleep through his anxious anticipation. Mr. Simmons had promised a decision by noon. He tried to distract himself with coursework, but found himself repeatedly checking his email and phone. At 11:47, the call came. "Mr. Bennett, James Simmons from Westridge. I'm pleased to inform you that your emergency grant has been approved in the amount of $3,000. The funds will be transferred directly to your university bursar's office by close of business today." Marcus sat down hard on his bed, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "Thank you," he managed. "I don't know what to say. Your work speaks for itself, Mr. Bennett. The foundation was particularly impressed with your community-centered designs. We'll be in touch about possible internship opportunities after graduation." After the call ended, Marcus sat in a stunned silence. Not only was his immediate crisis resolved, but a door had potentially opened to post-graduation employment, the next looming anxiety on his horizon. His first instinct was to call his mother, but he hesitated. Better to wait until the money actually hit his account. He'd had too many last-minute disappointments to celebrate prematurely. Instead, he gathered the books Edward had lent him and headed to the cafe early. He wanted to be there when the old man arrived, to properly express his gratitude. Whatever connections Edward had at the foundation had clearly influenced the speed and outcome of his application. But Edward didn't show at their appointed time. Marcus waited an hour, then another, nursing cold coffee and trying to quell his growing concern. Had something happened to the old man? His apparent frailty on Friday had seemed less pronounced on Saturday, but still, without Edward's address or phone number, Marcus had no way to check on him. He finally left a note with the cafe staff, thanking Edward for his help and asking him to call, leaving his own number. On Monday morning, Marcus verified that the grant money had indeed been transferred to his account. His tuition balance showed paid in full, with the extra $300 refunded to his student account for books or supplies. The relief was physical, like a vice loosening around his chest, allowing him to take a full breath for the first time in weeks. He called his mother immediately, explaining about the grant, but omitting the role Edward had played. No need to tell her he'd accepted help from someone who had been a stranger just days ago. Throughout the week, as Marcus threw himself into final preparation for exams, he kept expecting to hear from Edward. He returned to the cafe twice more, leaving additional notes, but received no response. The cafe staff recognized him now, offering sympathetic smiles but no information. By Friday, concern had overtaken gratitude. Whatever his reasons for helping, Edward had seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's work and ideas. His disappearance felt like more than just a missed appointment. After his last class, Marcus made a decision. He'd go to the Westridge Foundation office directly. Perhaps Mr. Simmons could help him contact Edward. Clearly, the two men knew each other. The foundation occupied a modest suite in a downtown office building. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up as Marcus entered. "I'm hoping to speak with Mr. Simmons," Marcus explained. "It's about Edward Phillips." Something flickered across the woman's face. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important. Mr. Phillips helped me secure a grant last weekend, and now I can't reach him. I'm concerned about him." She studied him for a long moment before picking up her phone. "Mr. Simmons? There's a young man here inquiring about Mr. Phillips." She listened, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Hanging up, she gestured toward a door. "Mr. Simmons will see you." James Simmons was younger than Marcus had expected, mid-40s with the tailored appearance of someone who understood the value of presentation without being ostentatious about it. He rose from behind his desk as Marcus entered, extending a hand. "Mr. Ed Bennett, a pleasure to meet in person. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm trying to locate Edward Phillips. He helped me tremendously and now I can't reach him. I'm worried something might have happened to him." Simmons gestured to a chair. "Please sit down." Once Marcus was seated, Simmons continued, his tone measured. "Mr. Phillips is fine, physically speaking. However, he's been called away on urgent business." "Oh." Marcus felt relieved, but also oddly disappointed. "Did he leave any message for me?" "Not specifically." Simmons seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Mr. Phillips tends to compartmentalize his various activities." "I don't understand." Simmons leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Bennett, how much do you know about Edward Phillips?" "Not much, I guess. He seems knowledgeable about architecture. He mentioned being helped by someone when he was young. I assumed he might be a retired professor or something similar." A slight smile touched Simmons' lips. "Not exactly. Mr. Phillips is the founder and former CEO of Phillips Development Corporation. He's also the primary benefactor of this foundation." Marcus blinked, trying to process this information. "Phillips Development? The real estate conglomerate?" "The same, but..." Marcus thought back to Edward's threadbare coat, his modest demeanor, the simple cafe where they'd met. "He seems so unassuming," Simmons suggested. "Mr. Phillips has never been comfortable with displays of wealth. In recent years, he's developed a habit of what he calls walking in the real world, spending time in various neighborhoods, using public transportation, observing how people actually live in the spaces his company has helped shape." The revelation was disorienting. Marcus tried to reconcile the elderly man who had needed help crossing the street with the billionaire developer Simmons was describing. "The grant, was it real? Or was it just him giving me money?" "The grant is entirely legitimate," Simmons assured him. Your application was reviewed by our committee and approved on its merits. Mr. Phillips recused himself from the decision, though his initial recommendation brought your file to our attention. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. Why didn't he tell me who he was? In my experience, Simmons replied, Mr. Phillips values genuine interactions. Wealth tends to distort people's behavior. He likely wanted to know you as a person, not as a potential beneficiary. Will he be back? Can I reach him somehow? Simmons hesitated. Mr. Phillips is quite private. However, he reached for a notepad and pen. I can pass along a message when he returns. Marcus considered what to write. A simple thank you seemed inadequate given what he now knew. Instead, he found himself sketching a quick but detailed rendering of a bench design with built-in planters and subtle features to make it accessible for elderly users. Beneath it, he wrote, for crosswalks that feel too short, thank you for helping me continue my journey. Marcus Bennett. As Simmons accepted the sketch, something in his expression shifted. A new respect, perhaps, or approval. I'll make sure he receives this. 2 weeks passed. Marcus completed his finals with renewed focus, his financial burden temporarily lifted, and his creative energy restored. The mystery of Edward Phillips lingered in his thoughts, but he gradually accepted that their brief connection might have been just that, a momentary intersection of two very different lives. Then on the first day of winter break, as he was preparing to take the bus to his mother's house for the holidays, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Marcus, it's Edward Phillips. I received your sketch. The familiar gravelly voice brought an immediate smile to Marcus's face. Mr. Phillips, I was worried about you. I apologize for my abrupt disappearance. An urgent family matter required my attention. A pause. I understand you've discovered my professional background. Mr. Simmons filled me in, Marcus acknowledged. Though I have to say, you're not what I expected a billionaire developer to be like. Edward's chuckle carried through the phone. I'll take that as a compliment. Listen, Marcus, I'm calling because I'd like to discuss something with you. A proposal of sorts. Are you still in town? Just about to leave for my mom's place. I see. When do you return? After New Year's. Then perhaps we could meet on January 3rd? There's a project I'd like your input on. Marcus agreed immediately, curiosity overriding any hesitation. They arranged to meet at Edward's office in the Phillips building downtown. A sleek glass tower that Marcus had passed countless times, never imagining he would one day have business there. The holidays passed in a blur of his mother's cooking, sporadic part-time work at a local hardware store, and long conversations where he finally felt able to share his hopes rather than just his worries. He told her about Edward and the foundation grant, though he downplayed the billionaire aspect to avoid sounding fantastical. When January 3rd arrived, Marcus found himself standing in the soaring lobby of the Phillips building, his portfolio case clutched perhaps too tightly in his hand. The security guard directed him to an express elevator that required a key card, which the guard provided with a respectful nod. The elevator opened directly into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Edward stood at the glass wall, gazing out at the skyline, looking more substantial in a well-tailored suit than he had in his street clothes. He turned as Marcus entered, his smile genuine. Marcus, thank you for coming. He gestured toward the view. Quite a perspective from up here, isn't it? Marcus joined him at the window, momentarily awestruck by the panorama. From this height, the city revealed its patterns. The flow of streets, the clustering of buildings, the green spaces interspersed throughout. An architect's dream view. It's incredible, he admitted. You can see how everything connects. Yes, though it's easy to forget there are people down there, living in the spaces between the buildings. That's what I've been thinking about since we met. Edward turned from the window, motioning Marcus toward a conference table where architectural drawings were spread out. This is why I wanted to see you. The plans showed a large-scale development, mixed residential and commercial, with green spaces and community facilities integrated throughout. The design was bold yet practical, innovative without being ostentatious. This is the Riverside project, Edward explained. My last major development before I step back from active management. It breaks ground in March. Marcus studied the plans with professional interest. The integration of affordable units with market-rate housing is seamless. And these community spaces, they're actual amenities, not afterthoughts. That was the intention, but something's missing. Edward tapped the center of the main drawing. This space, originally planned as a decorative plaza, I want to repurpose it as something more functional. Something that serves the actual community that will live here. Marcus looked at the area in question, a sizable plaza at the heart of the development. What did you have in mind? That's where you come in. Edward's blue eyes held that same penetrating quality Marcus had first noticed at the crosswalk. I've reviewed your portfolio, not just what you submitted to the foundation, but your complete academic record. Professor Harmon speaks very highly of your work. Marcus blinked in surprise. You contacted my professor? I did. And now I'm offering you a paid design internship to reimagine this central space, a real-world application of the community-centered approach you've been developing. The opportunity was beyond anything Marcus had dared hope for, not just the professional recognition, but the chance to actually implement his ideas in a major development. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Edward replied simply. Your perspective is exactly what this project needs. Someone who understands that buildings are ultimately about the people who use them. Why me? Marcus asked, still struggling to comprehend his good fortune. There must be dozens of established architects who would jump at this chance. Edward was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the window. Do you know what I was doing at that crosswalk the day we met? Marcus shook his head. I was trying to remember why I started designing buildings in the first place. Edward's voice had softened, tinged with something like nostalgia. 50 years ago, I wanted to create spaces that improved lives. Somewhere along the way, amid the acquisitions and expansions, that purpose got buried under balance sheets and shareholder expectations. He turned back to Marcus. When you helped me across that street, you didn't see a developer or a billionaire. You saw a human being needing assistance. And when you talked about your designs, you spoke about human needs. Dignity, community, accessibility. That's the perspective this project needs. The sincerity in Edward's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't charity or whimsy. It was a genuine professional opportunity, offered because Edward saw value in Marcus's approach. I'd be honored, Marcus said finally. When do we start? Edward's smile deepened the creases around his eyes. We already have. The moment you stopped to help an old man cross the street. Over the next 6 months, as Marcus completed his final semester of college while working on the Riverside Plaza design, his relationship with Edward evolved from mentor-protege to genuine friendship. They met weekly, sometimes at Edward's office, sometimes walking through neighborhoods to observe how people actually used public spaces. Marcus learned that Edward's gruff exterior concealed a deep thoughtfulness and a wry sense of humor. Edward, in turn, seemed to draw energy from Marcus's idealism and fresh perspective. The generation gap between them became irrelevant in the face of their shared passion for meaningful design. The Riverside Plaza gradually took shape, not as the sterile hardscape originally planned, but as a vibrant community hub with flexible spaces for farmers markets, cultural events, and everyday gathering. Marcus incorporated elements specifically designed for elderly users, including the bench design he'd sketched for Edward, which became a signature feature throughout the development. On graduation day, Marcus spotted Edward sitting beside his mother in the audience, the billionaire developer and the diner waitress, chatting comfortably as if they'd known each other for years. Later, Edward confided that he'd offered her a position managing resident services at one of his properties, a job that utilized her people skills while providing better pay and regular hours. The day the Riverside project broke ground, Edward insisted that Marcus join him at the ceremony. As cameras flashed and officials made speeches, Edward leaned over to murmur, "None of this matters as much as what happens after people move in. That's when we'll know if we've succeeded." 6 months after completion, the development was fully occupied, with a waiting list for the affordable units. The plaza had become exactly what Marcus had envisioned, a genuine community space where residents gathered, children played, and seniors found comfortable places to observe the daily rhythm of life. On a crisp autumn afternoon, exactly 2 years after their first meeting, Edward and Marcus sat on one of the benches they had designed together, watching the plaza fill with people attending a weekend craft market. "I received an interesting proposal yesterday," Edward said casually. "The city wants to revitalize that old industrial district near the river. Mixed-use development, emphasis on affordable housing, and small business incubation." Marcus nodded, familiar with the area. A once vibrant manufacturing zone now sitting largely abandoned. "I told them I'd consider it on one condition," Edward continued, "that they accept Phillips and Bennett Urban Design as the lead architectural firm." Marcus turned to him in shock. "Phillips and Bennett? As in you and me," Edward confirmed. "Equal partners. Your design vision, my experience and connections. A new firm focused exclusively on community-centered development. The offer was breathtaking in its generosity and trust. Edward, I don't know what to say. I've only been out of school for a year, and in that year, you've proven your capabilities beyond question. Edward's expression grew serious. I'm 78 years old, Marcus. I've built an empire of glass and steel, but I've realized lately that what matters is the legacy of purpose, not just structure. You have the vision I once had. Together, we could build something truly meaningful. As Marcus struggled to find words adequate to the moment, a young woman approached their bench. A small child balanced on her hip. She was clearly a resident. Marcus recognized her from the community meetings they'd held during design development. "Excuse me," she said, slightly hesitant. "Are you the architects? The ones who designed this place?" Edward gestured toward Marcus. "He's the one you want to thank. This plaza was his design." She shifted her child to her other hip. "I just wanted to say, this space has changed everything for us. I know my neighbors now. My son has safe places to play. It feels like someone actually thought about how we live, not just where to put us." After she left, Marcus and Edward sat in silence for a moment, watching the child toddle toward the play area, his mother close behind. "That," Edward said finally, "is worth more than any building I've ever put up." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "Phillips and Bennett," he said, testing the sound of it. "I like it." Edward extended his hand, and as Marcus grasped it, he was reminded of that first handshake at the crosswalk, how neither of them could have possibly imagined where that simple connection would lead. "To building things that matter," Edward said. Around them, the plaza hummed with life, children laughing, seniors chatting on the benches, young professionals working on laptops in the shade of trees that were still small, but growing steadily. In time, they would provide shelter and beauty for generations to come, just like the unexpected friendship between a struggling student and a retired billionaire, which had begun with the simple act of helping someone cross the street